The letter came unexpectedly, slipped under my apartment door sometime after midnight. Its envelope, weathered and stained, bore no markings except for my name scrawled in an uneven hand. Inside was a single slip of parchment, its edges brittle, the ink faded but legible enough to send shivers down my spine. The truth you seek lies beneath. I didn't know what truth it referred to, but something about those words burrowed into my mind. I told myself it was a prank, but I couldn't let it go. Beneath? Beneath what? The answer came 2 days later in the form of a whisper overheard at a coffee shop. A man sitting at the table beside me leaned toward his companion, murmuring, "The catacombs. They've been sealed for decades, but some people still find a way in." My pulse quickened, though I didn't know why. It felt like a sign. That night, I packed a flashlight, gloves, and a notebook, ignoring the sinking feeling in my stomach. By dawn, I stood at the entrance to the city's ancient catacombs. The entrance was tucked behind a forgotten cemetery at the edge of town. Weathered stone steps descended into darkness, flanked by walls thick with moss. The gate that was supposed to bar entry hung open, rusted hinges whining in the breeze. I was supposed to meet a guide, a local who claimed to know the catacombs like the back of his hand. He had promised to take me through the safe routes, keep me from getting lost. But he never showed. Instead, as I hesitated at the entrance, a man shuffled out of the shadows. His clothes were ragged, his face pallid and gaunt, as if he hadn't seen sunlight in years. His eyes, dull and sunken, darted around without ever landing on me. "You don't belong here," he muttered, his voice a raspy whisper. I asked if he'd seen my guide, but he only shook his head, his lips curling into something between a smile and a grimace. "He doesn't come anymore. No one does. Not since the king woke up." The words meant nothing to me then, but the way he said them, the trembling, the way his gaze flicked to the catacombs as if expecting something to emerge, made my stomach tighten. Before I could ask him to explain, he shuffled away, disappearing into the fog that clung to the cemetery. I should have turned back, but the letter, the whispers, it was all too much to ignore. I took a deep breath and descended into the catacombs. The air grew heavy the deeper I went, carrying a damp chill that clung to my skin. My flashlight beam carved through the darkness, illuminating walls etched with crumbling inscriptions. Names of the dead, dates long past, each word a reminder that I was walking through a graveyard. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of my footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the stone ceiling. But as I ventured further, that silence began to feel alive, like something unseen was listening, waiting. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the faint sound of voices murmuring just out of earshot. But they grew louder, weaving through the tunnels like smoke. My flashlight flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, the darkness seemed to press in around me. I reached a junction where the walls were marked with strange symbols. They weren't part of the catacomb's original design. These carvings were crude and erratic, etched with frantic energy. That's when I noticed it. Beneath the symbols, someone had scrawled a warning in jagged letters. "Do not seek the king." I should have heeded the warning. Instead, it only fueled my curiosity. What king? The carvings didn't fit the historical records I'd read about the catacombs. There was no mention of royalty tied to this place, no lore about any kind of ruler beneath the city. I pressed forward. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, and the walls seemed to close in. An hour passed, or maybe more. Time had become meaningless in the oppressive darkness. My flashlight flickered again, and I fumbled to check the batteries. As I knelt to adjust it, the beam swept over the floor. and I froze. Footprints. They were faint, as though made by bare feet, trailing through the dust ahead. Someone had been here, and recently. I followed them, every step amplifying the sense of dread gnawing at me. The footprints led me to a narrow passage, its ceiling so low I had to stoop. As I crawled through, the whispers crescendoed, and I thought I heard my name woven into the chorus. The passage opened into a vast chamber. My breath caught. The walls glowed faintly with an eerie blue light, emanating from veins of some unearthly mineral embedded in the stone. Bones were scattered across the floor, arranged in patterns too deliberate to be random. At the center stood a massive throne-like structure. It wasn't made of stone or wood, but of bones, human and otherwise, interwoven in grotesque symmetry. The air thrummed with an energy I couldn't explain, and I realized the whispers had stopped. The silence was worse. It pressed down on me, filling my chest with a primal fear I couldn't shake. Then, from the far end of the chamber, a shadow moved. It wasn't a person. No human could move like that, gliding noiselessly, its form shifting as though made of smoke. I turned to flee, but my legs wouldn't obey. The shadow stopped, coalescing into a shape, a figure. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, and its mouth twisted into a grin that made my blood freeze. The Catacomb King had found me. I couldn't move. My body felt paralyzed, rooted to the floor as the figure stepped closer. It didn't walk, not exactly. Its movements were unnatural, a series of disjointed gliding strides that left no sound in their wake. As it drew near, the faint glow of the chamber revealed its full form. The Catacomb King wasn't entirely solid. Its body wavered, a patchwork of tattered flesh and shifting shadows. Its crown, if it could be called that, was a jagged ring of bone fused to its skull, and its grin was too wide, too unnatural, the teeth too sharp. "You've come far," it rasped, its voice not a sound, but a vibration that seemed to originate in the walls themselves. The words reverberated through the chamber, sinking into my mind like hooks. "What do you seek, little wanderer?" The letter flashed in my thoughts, but I couldn't speak. My throat constricted, my heart hammering against my ribs. The king tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Ah!" it hissed, the sound like wind scraping over a tombstone. "The truth. Always the truth. But truth demands a price." Its hand, if that's what it was, rose slowly, long talon-like fingers reaching out. The air grew impossibly cold, frost creeping over the ground, and I felt my lungs seize as if the very oxygen was being drawn away. Something shifted behind me, a soft shuffle of movement. I broke from my paralysis and turned, hoping, praying for an escape. But what I saw was worse than the king. They were human, or had been. Pale, emaciated figures with hollow eyes and slack jaws, their bodies twisted in unnatural ways. Some crawled on all fours, others staggered upright, but all of them moved with the same dreadful jerking gait. Their whispers began again, a chorus of gibberish and groans that filled the chamber. "Behold my court," the king said, its tone mocking, regal. "Once seekers like you. Now, they serve." One of the creatures lunged forward, its skeletal hand outstretched. I stumbled back, narrowly avoiding its grasp, but my heel caught on the edge of a bone. I fell, my flashlight clattering to the floor, the beam swinging wildly. "Run," the king said, its grin widening. "Run, if you think it will save you." It laughed then, a deep, guttural sound that shook the chamber. The creatures surged forward as one, their movements frantic, eager. I scrambled to my feet and bolted, not daring to look back. The passage I'd entered through was gone, replaced by a labyrinth of narrow tunnels. Every turn looked the same, dark, damp, and suffocating. My flashlight flickered again, its beam growing weaker with each passing second. Behind me, the whispers grew louder, closer. My breath came in ragged gasps, the air burning in my chest. The tunnels seemed to twist unnaturally, leading me in circles no matter which direction I chose. I stumbled into another chamber, smaller than the first, but no less chilling. The walls were lined with shelves, each one cradling skulls that seemed to watch me with empty sockets. In the center was a pedestal, and upon it sat an object that caught my eye. A jagged shard of glowing stone, the same blue light that pulsed faintly through the walls. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to it. My instincts screamed to keep running, but something deeper compelled me to reach out. As my fingers closed around the shard, a wave of energy surged through me, cold, sharp, and electric. The whisper stopped. I didn't have time to question what had happened. The shard in my hand vibrated faintly, its glow intensifying as I held it. For the first time since entering the catacombs, the oppressive dread eased slightly, like a candle flickering in the dark. Then the king's voice returned, low and venomous. "You dare steal from me?" I spun around. The king stood at the far end of the chamber, its skeletal crown gleaming in the eerie light. Its court lingered behind it, their hollow eyes fixed on me. "The shard," the king hissed, taking a step forward. "A relic of my power. You cannot wield it." But as it spoke, the creatures behind it hesitated, their movements slowing. I realized they were drawn to the shard, their hollow gazes shifting between it and the king. An idea began to form, fragile but desperate. If the shard was tied to the king's power, maybe it could be used against him. I gripped the stone tighter and raised it toward the king. Its light flared, filling the chamber with an unnatural brilliance. The creatures recoiled, shielding their faces, but the king only laughed. A dry, grating sound. "You think light will save you? Foolish mortal. The dark is where I reign." With a gesture, the king summoned the shadows around him, the chamber plunging into near-total darkness. The shard's glow flickered, but I refused to let go. "You're wrong," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Your power isn't invincible." I slammed the shard into the ground. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the chamber, the blue light surging outward in jagged tendrils. The king shrieked, its form flickering violently, the shadows around it dissipating. The creature screamed, a high-pitched, inhuman wail as the light engulfed them. They collapsed one by one, their bodies crumbling into ash. The king staggered, its glowing eyes narrowing to slits. "You think this is over?" it growled. "I am eternal. You cannot destroy me." With a final guttural roar, it dissolved into shadow, retreating into the walls. The light from the shard faded, leaving me alone in the silence. But the silence wasn't comforting. It felt like the eye of a storm, a pause before something worse. I fled the catacombs, clutching the shard as though it were my lifeline. The whispers were gone, the king's court reduced to dust. But as I emerged into the pale light of dawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Deep beneath the city, the Catacomb King was waiting, and he wouldn't stay dormant for long. The streets above were eerily quiet when I emerged, the city's usual hum muffled as though the world held its breath. The shard in my hand had dimmed, its once brilliant glow reduced to a faint flicker. Yet, even in its weakened state, I clung to it, unwilling to part with the only thing that had kept me alive. As I stumbled toward my apartment, the horrors of the catacombs refused to leave me. The king's words echoed in my mind, his laughter reverberating in the hollow spaces of my chest. You cannot destroy me. That night, sleep was a fleeting luxury. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the chamber, the king's grotesque grin inches from my face. The air in my room felt heavy, stifling, and I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. Then came the whispers. At first they were faint, so quiet I thought I imagined them. But as the hours passed, they grew louder, more insistent. My name spoken in voices that were not my own, woven into a chorus that made my skin crawl. I glanced at the shard on my nightstand. Its light pulsed weakly, as though responding to the whispers. I reached for it, but the moment my fingers brushed its surface, a searing pain shot through my hand. The whispers stopped, and then the shadow came. It began in the corner of my room, a patch of darkness that seemed too deep, too tangible. It spread like spilled ink, crawling up the walls and across the ceiling. The air grew cold, my breath clouding in the faint moonlight. You thought you could escape me. The voice was unmistakable. The king's form coalesced within the shadow, his skeletal crown gleaming faintly. He was smaller than before, less substantial, but no less terrifying. You belong to me now. I backed away, clutching the shard despite the pain. The king advanced, his grin widening, his glowing eyes burning into mine. My heart thundered as I realized the truth. I hadn't defeated him. I had only brought him with me. As he reached for me, the shard flared, one last burst of blinding blue light that sent him recoiling with an ear-splitting shriek. The light faded quickly, and so did the king, his form dissolving into the darkness. But I knew he wasn't gone. Not entirely. The shard lies dormant now, its glow extinguished. But the shadows in my room linger longer than they should, and the whispers return when the nights are at their darkest. Deep beneath the city, or perhaps closer than I dare admit, the Catacomb King waits. And one day, he will come for me.